I woke up and looked around. Everything was just about the same. "Hey, Julie," I said. "You up yet?" Julie didn't answer. She couldn't. She was my imaginary playmate. Maybe I was crazy, but at least I knew Julie was someone I'd made up. I got out of bed, showered, dressed. It was all the same as it always was. And yet, I had the feeling something had changed. I didn't know what annoyed me the most about the setup. I had given up being annoyed. I had one room and a bathroom. Outside of my room was a glassed-in porch. I could walk out on the porch and sun myself. They seemed to have the sun going all day long, every day. I wondered what had happened to the rainy days I'd known back in my youth. Or maybe there were rainy days, but I just wasn't seeing them. I had suspected for a long time that my room and its glassed-in enclosure were inside some other sort of a building, a really big building where they controlled the light and the climate, made it just like they wanted it. Evidently, the way they wanted it was with hazy sunlight all day long. I couldn't see the sun even when I was outside. Just a white sky and light glaring from it. It could come from Klieg lights, for all I knew. They didn't let me see much. I had spotted the cameras, however. They were little units, Sony's, I suspected, and their tiny black matte heads rotated all of the time, keeping me in sight. There were cameras inside my one room, too, up in the corners, behind steel netting that I couldn't tear away even if I wanted to, which I didn't, and cameras even in my bathroom. I hated that. During my first days here, I'd screamed at the walls. "Hey, what's it with you guys? Don't you got any sense of privacy? Can't a guy even take a dump without you watching?" But nobody ever answered me. No one ever talked to me. I'd been here 73 days. I made notches on the plastic table to keep count. But sometimes I forgot. And I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out to be a lot longer than that. They'd allowed me writing materials too, but no computer. Were they afraid of what I might do with a computer? I didn't have any idea. They gave me reading material too, old stuff. Moll Flanders, Idylls of the King, the Iliad and Odyssey, stuff like that. Good stuff, but not exactly up to date. And they never showed themselves. Why was that? I couldn't figure it out. I didn't even know what they looked like. They'd grabbed me back then, 73 days ago. Stuff had still been happening back then. I'd been home. I'd received an urgent fax. Office of the President. "We need you urgently." I'd come. In fact, they'd sent men to bring me to this place. Men who didn't answer any of my questions. I'd tried to find out. What's this all about? They'll tell you more inside. That's all they'd told me. And then I'd been inside. They'd given me a suite of rooms, told me to get some rest. There'd be a meeting soon. I'd gone to sleep that first night and been awakened by sounds of shooting. I'd gone to the door. It was locked. I could hear men shouting, struggling out in the hall, and then there'd been silence. And the silence had gone on and on. At first, I'd thought I was pretty well off. The others had gotten killed, I suspected. Those blank-faced men who'd brought me here. All dead. I was sure of it. I was the only one remaining. But what for? What did they want me for? I'd heard noises outside my suite of rooms. Sounded like someone was building something. What they were doing was cutting down my mobility, reducing my 3-room suite to a room, a bathroom, and a glassed-in outside area. Why had they done that? What was it all about? The hell of it was, I had a feeling about what it was all about. I thought I knew, but I didn't want to admit it to myself. The time of the tests had come. That had been a few weeks ago. They had poked instruments down through the ceiling. Stuff that looked at me. Stuff on the end of wires that recorded me. I'd gone a little crazy during that time. I knew they'd gassed me a couple of times. When I came to, I found cuts and injection marks on my body. Bruises. They'd been experimenting with me, trying to find out something, using me as a guinea pig. But for what? Just because I'd started the whole mess? That wasn't fair. They'd no right to do that. It hadn't been my fault. I invented an imaginary playmate after a while. Someone to talk to. They must have thought I was crazy, but I needed someone to talk to. I just couldn't go on talking in my head all the time. So listen, Julie, the way I figure it, it all began back then, when Gomez and I went out to Alkmaar. I don't think I ever told you about Alkmaar, did I? I had, of course, but Julie was always obliging. No, you never mentioned it. What's Alkmaar? It's this planet. It's quite some distance from Earth. A long way. But I went there, Gomez and I. That's where we found the discovery that changed everything. What did you find? Julie asked. Well, let me bring you back to those faraway days. I was hanging out in this bar in Taos when I ran into Gomez over a bowl of hard-boiled eggs. We started to talk, as strangers will on a sleepy morning in a sleepy little town in New Mexico, with nothing much to do with the long day ahead, but drink a lot of beer and dream a lot of dreams. Gomez was a short, barrel-chested guy from Santa Fe, a painter. He'd come to Taos to sketch tourists, make a few bucks. He'd taken a degree in art history at the University of New Mexico, but his interest was in alien artifacts. Is that a fact? I said. I'm interested in that stuff myself. You gotta remember how it was back in those days. Exploration of space was brand spanking new. It had begun with the Dijkstra drive, the faster-than-light drive that made space exploration possible. You used the Dijkstra only between the stars, out in deep space. When you got in close, you used the ion engines for maneuvering. That's where you burned up the fuel. And fuel cost money. So the search was on for intelligent life. Yes, that was the big one. But that was on a level above the one I was operating on, or wanted to be operating on. I wanted to make some money in artifacts. It was a big market, especially in the first 10 years or so of the rush to space, when everybody was crazy to own some piece of shit from an alien planet. Put it up on the mantle. See that doohickey? It came from Arcturus 5. I've got papers to prove it. Humans are crazy about conversation pieces. The fad ran down after a while, but there was still plenty of demand. By the time I got into the racket, collectors had become a whole lot more discriminating. The stuff you brought in had to be of artistic merit, as they phrased it. How do you judge artistic merit? I don't. That's why I had Gomez along. If Gomez, with his credentials, said it was good, dealers were apt to believe him. I was qualified. I'd pushed ships for NASA for a couple of years, until a difference of opinion with my superior put me out of work. I was looking for a way to get back in. Gomez was a couple of years younger than me, but he had similar ideas. Gomez was young, wanted to travel, and he was more than willing to sell his services cheap for the privilege of going out into deep space. An appraiser is important on a scavenging expedition. You need someone who has an idea of the current market, has some idea what dealers will pay for genuine alien artifacts. You also need a guy to prepare and sign the provenance, the statement that gives whatever is known about the origin of the article. Although he was young, Gomez's reputation in the field was excellent. If Gomez swore it was real alien goods, dealers would know they weren't buying something faked in a factory in Calcutta or Jersey City. That was the scavenging aspect. Of course, the main push was to find the folks who had left that stuff. But those guys just didn't seem to be around anymore. What happened to the vanished civilizations of the galaxy? That was a question that interested a lot of people. You know how much interest there is on Earth in vanished peoples. You don't, Julie? Take my word for it. Folks find it romantic. Although the first buying spree was over, alien artifacts was still a pretty good racket. Even though there were a lot of people out there working it, the ruins scattered around the galaxy were a long way from being picked over. Just too many planets, too many ruins, and too few spaceships. So Gomez and I talked about this stuff, there in the hazy cigarette smoke and beer smell, among Indians and tourists and farmers. After a while, Gomez said, "You know, Dalton, we could make a good team. You're a spaceship jockey, and I've got the art appraisal skills we'd need." I agree, I told him, But we lack just one thing, a ship and some backers. Investing in spaceships to go scavenging in was a popular speculation in those days. You'd be surprised how many people were able to get their hands on a spaceship. For a while, every country in the world felt it needed at least one spaceship for national prestige. There was a time when there were more working ships than qualified men to ran them. I had the know-how, and I had the right attitude. I mean, I was no pure science freak. I liked to make a profit. I could maybe help us find something, Gomez said. I know some people did some art appraising for them last year. They were pleased with the results. I heard them talking about going into deep space exploration. Sounds like a natural to me, I said. 50-50 between us, okay? Where do we see these guys? Let me make a phone call, Gomez said. He went away, came back in a few minutes. I talked with Mr. Rahman in Houston. He's interested. We've got a meeting with him day after tomorrow. Rahman, what kind of name is that? Arab? He's Indonesian. Rahman had a suite at the Star of Texas. He was in town doing an oil deal with some Texas wildcatters. He was a little skinny guy, colored a medium brown, a shade darker than Gomez, little mustache. He didn't wear no native clothes. Italian silk suit must have cost thousands. He was a Muslim, but there was no silly stuff about not drinking alcohol. He poured us some Jim Beam Reserve and had one himself. We talked, casual stuff for a while, and I got the definite impression that this Rahman and his people had a lot of money they didn't really know what to do with. A little birdie told me it might have been drug money. Not that I thought Rahman was a dealer, but he was an advance man for an Indonesian investment group, and their cash flow seemed a little heavy to be accounted for entirely from oil. But what do I know? Just an impression, and his willingness to do business with Gomez and me, a couple of unknowns. First, he went over my credentials. They were pretty good, if I do say so myself. I'd worked ships for NASA for a couple of years until I got into a dispute with my superior and found myself out of a job. After that, I'd gotten work for a private company, pushing a supply ship between Earth and the L5 colony. That went fine until L5 went bust and I was out of work again. I had the papers and newspaper clippings to document everything. Your credentials look good to me, Mr. Dalton, Rahman said. I already know Mr. Gomez's work. We'd be willing to make an arrangement with you. Salary plus 10% of the profits on whatever you find, to be split between you and Mr. Gomez. What do you think? I'd like it a lot better if you could make that 10% for each of us. It's not a deal breaker, but it would be nice. Rahman thought for a while. I guess he was thinking that this, from his point of view, was mainly a way to sock away some hot money. Profit was secondary. Rahman's group was making theirs right here on Earth. I suppose we could accommodate you, Rahman said. Come to Jakarta with me and take a look at our ship. If you approve, we'll draw up papers. How soon can you begin? We've started right now, I said, looking at Gomez. He nodded. The city of Jakarta was a pretty good ship. German manufacture, Indonesian ownership. The Krauts made pretty good ships back in those days. We signed a contract, loaded supplies. I made a few phone calls, picked up some information, and in a month we were on our way. The first planet we checked out, Alkmaar Befort in Bootes, circled an O-type star in the Borodin cluster, which is a dense region of a couple thousand stars, 2/3 of them with planets. I paid a lot for the information. I got it from a technician attached to a British star mapping expedition. He hadn't been against earning a little on the side. There are channels where you can pick up that sort of information. I'm good with a spaceship, but I'm even better at working the channels and making a deal. This info cost a lot, but it looked like it was going to be worth it. My guy said he thought Alkmaar 4 had ruins, though his group hadn't gotten close enough to be sure. When Gomez and I got there, we agreed at once that we'd struck pay dirt. Now was the time to put down and let Gomez do his thing. When I checked it out, I found Alkmaar the Fourth had enough oxygen for us, and gravity 9/10 that of Earth. And so we went down hoping for a big strike, like Lefkowitz had when he discovered the Manupta friezes on Elgin Twenton and sold them for a bundle direct to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. In fact, I knew this had to be good, or I was in trouble. I was using up a lot of fuel. It's costly to maneuver at sublight speeds in the area of planets. It was a yellowish-brown planet with some green patches. Those patches showed where there was water and vegetation. We did an aerial recon of the largest patches and found a section that looked good enough for us to go to the expense of putting the ship down on the ground. It's more economical to put the ship in orbit and go back and forth by orbiter, but it also takes more equipment, to say nothing of the cost of an orbiter. We didn't have one. When something good came up, we wanted the ship right down there with us. There were ruins, all right. They were spread out over several hundred acres, circular ruins in a jungle. They were surrounded by what had once been a wall. The atmosphere checked out okay, no noxious stuff. So we unpacked our dirt bikes and rode into the area. The first couple days were spent just getting a feel of the place. It took us almost a week before we hit on an area that looked worth examining closely. It was deep in the jungle, and it appeared to be the remains of a circular building. A temple, maybe. We'd call it that on the report anyway. We went in slowly. filming everything, because film of these expeditions is worth some money too. We were looking for just about anything. Household stuff is always good. Furniture, household items, cups, bowls, armor, weapons. Anything that might look good hanging on a wall or sitting on a table in a museum or some rich guy's house. Trouble is, it's almost impossible to find stuff like that. The disappeared aliens don't leave you much. It's a mystery. Hell, everything's a mystery. We came across a broken staircase leading down into the ground. This was a very good sign. In most ruins, you don't even find this much. I gave Gomez a wink. This one's going to make us rich, partner. Gomez shrugged. Don't be too sure. Explorers have been disappointed before. I got a feeling about this one, I told him. The steps led down a long ways and into a big underground chamber. It was a spooky place, low domed ceiling, protruding rocks casting weird shadows. There were some metal objects lying around on the ground. I picked up a couple of them and showed them to Gomez. He shook his head. That stuff doesn't look alien enough. That's a problem in this line of work. People have pretty firm ideas about what they think alien ought to look like. Something alien ought to look like something you couldn't find on Earth. Something that nobody ever thought of macking. Something that gave off an air of mystery. And that's asking a lot of a pot or a chair. Just about everything you found on an alien planet was alien only by definition. But the few pots and cups that had been found could just as easily have been made on Earth. Not even a letter stating where and when the object had been found would give them any real value. The stuff people paid cash money for had to look alien, not just be alien. It had to fit people's idea of alien. It presented a challenge. There was another chamber after the first one. We went into it, our floodlights sweeping the place with white light. And it was there we saw it, the object that came to be called the Eryx. Now listen, Julie, don't carry this beautiful but dumb act too far. Everyone on Earth has heard of the Eryx. You've got to have heard of it. Maybe in your circle, they called it the alien gizmo. Does that ring a bell? It rested on a piece of shiny cloth with marks on it. It was sitting on a low stone pillar with fluted sides. The object seemed to be shiny metal, though no one has ever discovered what it's made of. It was about the size of a child's head. It was carved or cast or worked into shapes I'd never seen before, nor had Gomez. The shapes looked random and chaotic at first, but when you sat down and studied them, you could see there was a logic at work there. The thing glowed. It glistened. Its shapes and angles seemed to be curved, but it was difficult to say whether they were convex curves or concave ones. Sometimes it looked like one thing, sometimes another. Nor were all the planes identical. Optical effect, a triumph of the eye. Staring at it was like staring into a cubistic candle whose surfaces and facets were unfamiliar but fascinating, which held the eye, drawing it ever deeper. "Man, we've got it," Gomez said. "The big one. This has to be the art find of the century. And the hell of it is, I can't tell if it was manufactured or grown, or if it's a natural form." We didn't speak for a long time, Gomez and me, but we were thinking the same thoughts, or at least, I think we were. I was thinking, this is it, the big one, the pot at the end of the rainbow. This is the mother of all alien objects. It doesn't look like anything anyone has ever seen before. And it's small enough to fit on the mantle of the richest man in the world. It was the ultimate desirable object. You couldn't do better than that. After gawking at it for a while, we went back to the ship and brought back equipment for carrying it to the ship. We didn't touch it with our hands. We used a neutral surface manipulator to lift it and place it ever so gently into a padded container. We didn't know if this thing was fragile or what. We just knew it was important not to break our egg on the way to market. Gomez even made a joke about it. "We're putting all our egg into one basket," he said, as we got it back to the ship and stowed it away in the cargo hold. It was going to be Gomez's last joke for a while. We decided to spend no more time on Alkmaar. This one find was going to make our fortunes, and we decided to get right onto it. I cranked up the ship's engine, and that's where we had our first indication that things weren't going to be quite as simple as we'd expected. The engine wouldn't start. "Now, Julie, take my word for it, when your spaceship engine won't turn over, it's not a simple matter of changing spark plugs or adding gas. These engines aren't meant to be fooled with by the likes of me or Gomez. It takes a full maintenance crew working in a factory facility to do anything with one of those things." All we could do was run the diagnostics. All they told us was that the thing wasn't working. We knew that ourselves. What we didn't know was why, or what to do about it. We didn't give up as easily as that. I went through the whole drill, reran the diagnostics. Ran diagnostics on the diagnostics. Tried to get a signal to the home office back on Earth. That was futile, of course. Modern spaceship travel leaves you in the curious position of being able to reach a place faster than light can do it, and a hell of a lot faster than any form of signal transmission. It looked like we were stuck, and the hell of it was, there wasn't anyone who might come out to see what had gone wrong with us. We were like the pioneers trekking across the Rockies to California, or like Cortez and his conquistadores slogging across unknown lands in search of Aztec riches. If a conquistador's horse broke down, Spain didn't send an expedition out to rescue him. They just wrote him off. And that's what would happen with us. No one had asked us to come out here. Our Indonesian sponsors didn't a give damn if we got back or not. Not as long as they kept the insurance paid up. We didn't panic. Gomez and I had always known this was one of the risks of this deal. We sat around and hoped maybe the engine would come back online all by itself. It's been known to happen. We played chess, we read books, we ate our supplies, and at last we decided to take the Eric's out of storage and take a look at it again. If we had to go, at least we could go in what Gomez called an aesthetic manner. I guess I haven't told you why we called it the Eric's. It was because of what we found on that piece of cloth the thing had been sitting on. That cloth was covered with marks and doodles. We thought it was just a design. But it turned out to be the first bit of alien writing anyone had discovered, and it was the only one until a year or so later. Clayton Ross came across the inscribed rock that they called the Space Age Rosetta Stone during his expedition to Ophiuchus II. One part was in an ancient variation of Sanskrit, the rest in 3 alien languages, one of which corresponded to the writing on the Eric's cloth. Gomez and I had come up with the first writing ever discovered in an alien language, but we didn't know that at the time. It took experts to point out that what we had thought was just a decorative pattern was, in fact, language. As for why we named the gizmo Eric's, follow me on this, Julie. At the top of the cloth, or what we figured was the top, there were 4 marks larger than the others in what turned out to be the text. We couldn't read them, of course, but the 4 largest characters looked like the English letters ERYX. So we called our gizmo the Eric's. The name caught on. Everybody called it that, right from the start. As you've doubt surmised, being the clever little lady you are, we didn't die on Alkmaar. We got off. What happened, you see, is that we brought the Eric's out of the hold and into the main cabin, so we could look at what might be costing us our lives. This put it not only close to us, but also to the engines. When we tried to start up again, something happened. We never did figure out what or why. But suddenly, everything was in the green, and our engine was working again. Coincidence? We thought it might have been, but we weren't so filled with the spirit of scientific experimentation that we were ready to move the Eric's back to the hold just to see if the engine died again. That would be carrying the spirit of experimentation too far. We got the hell out of Alkmaar while we could. Got back to Earth. Raman met us in the Disneyland Hotel in Jogjakarta. He thought the Eric's was pretty, but you could tell he wasn't impressed. Or maybe it was because he had a lot of other stuff on his mind. I only learned later that the CIA and local narcotics feds had become very interested in Rahman and his partners. I guess Rahman saw trouble coming because he said, "I'm sure we could sell this and realize a fine profit. But I have a better idea. I've consulted with my partners. We're going to give this object to a big American research company to hold in the public trust, to study for the benefit of all mankind." "That's very civic-minded of you," I said. "But why would you want to do that?"